Hi, I'm Laura Flanders. This week on the show, two culture bakers. Best-selling detective novelist Walter Mosley on capitalism, socialism, and everything in between. Queer black troublemaker Alexis Pauline Gumbs. And a few words from me on culture and change-making. It's all coming up right here. Hi, I'm Laura Flanders. Well, today on the program, a whole lot of crime novelists keep pretty far removed from the weighty issues of race and class. Our next guest does the opposite. Not only do his novels dive deep into those themes, but on a regular basis he publishes monographs too, extended essays on things like war and peace and terrorism. This fall, not only did the president's favorite detective writer publish a new book in his best-selling Easy Rollin series, he came out with a new manifesto calling on us to end the war between capitalism and socialism and figure out a compromise. He's calling it Untopia. Walter Mosley is no stranger to the Laura Flanders Show. Welcome back, Walter.
Well, thank you.
So is that unfair on crime novelists to say most of them stay away from weighty themes?
I'm not sure. I mean, the genre is a good genre because you can actually, like, for instance, if you wanted to talk about, undocumented laborers, in Central California. If you just wrote a novel about some guy who did that or some woman who did that, only people who are interested in it would do it. But if you wrote one about a Chicano detective from LA who comes up to find who killed the plantation owner and the people around were those people, then you get into it that way. And I think there's a certain amount, maybe 10%, 15% of mystery writers, crime novel writers who do that.
Yeah, so you say it's a great field, but it's not enough for you, obviously. You go and write these monographs as well. How come?
Well, because one thing is when you're writing a novel, you can't really take a side. You just whoever your character is, they're going to do what they do. Uh-huh. And so every once in a while, I feel like I need to talk about things that seem so obvious that we need to do.
Like?
Well, like, for the last 150 years, there's been this battle between communism and capitalism, two impossible systems by themselves. And, after 150 years of the dialectic, the battle, the fight, we should figure out, well, we need both of them to survive, so let's have both of them.
So what do you propose, and what is this Untopia? I love the word.
Well, the only thing, a monograph is good because it's not like I'm telling you what you need to do. I'm just saying what I think that we should be thinking about. We should think about what part of our lives and our society are definitely socialistic and what part of our society have to do with profit and wealth, and how do those things, come together. Also to understand the internal workings, like people think that there's only one kind of capitalism, but there's the lowest or the earliest kind, mercantile capitalism, which I experienced one day. I saw these three young men, 3 o'clock in the morning, standing in front of a drugstore, selling candy bars out of a box at half the price they cost in the drugstore. Now, I know that the people who own the drugstore and places like that have already passed laws, right, saying that this is illegal. So what that is a kind of a fascist capitalism trying to destroy its relatives, so only it controls all of the money. And so, that's one thing to understand. Also, to understand we're not naturally social beings, and we're not socialist beings. We might be somewhat social. We work together, but we're not like bees or ants or termites. We're not like that.
Well, I love what you said about your own contradictions, and maybe you've been struggling with this for many years. I'd love to hear how it's played out over the years, but I feel the same way, that yes, we talk about socialism, we talk about a lot of things, but actually we also still want the latest fashion, the latest tech good. You say, I'm attracted to socialism, but I'm in love with the idea of being rich.
And it's true. I am. And I think and some people might say, well, I'm just better than you because I only want socialism. But the thing is that if you have two bees collecting pollen, they don't check each other out to see who got the most pollen. They're doing their job. If I get more, that's great. But that doesn't matter. Human beings are not like that. If I'm working really hard and I brought in 25 tons of coal and you only brought in 4 pounds of coal, I'm going to complain and I'm going to be mad, and then there's going to be struggle, there's going to be strife. And that strife is based in capitalism.
So your proposal, when I mentioned it to my sister, who works for one of the largest banks in the world, and said, what about just distributing the bailout fairly and equally to everybody that needs it? Or better than that, a guaranteed minimum income for everybody, raise the floor. She said, that would destroy incentive. That's what we need to make people work. Is that true?
And that's an interesting notion to say, if you gave every person in America or in the world enough money to live for the rest of their life, and that somehow worked, that would destroy incentive. But if you gave somebody $10,000, that would just, give them a little respite. Right. That's not destroying incentive. I think that's one of the things. If we gave money for broccoli, brown rice, rather than corn and beer, and subsidies, it's still a subsidy. It's just that instead of helping agribusiness and big business, you're helping an individual. And we could create a better world blending capitalism and socialism.
Well, that's one of the reasons I liked that you just took on this subject, and we talk about it a lot on this program, because it makes you think, well, what is the system that we have now? An awful lot of people that we talk to, that we know, that we report on when we travel around, are not living a strictly capitalist life or a strictly socialist life. And if you look at the numbers, a huge proportion of Americans aren't in the formal economy at all.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
Well, they're trying to create a system that makes sense to them. I mean, when you see the federal government giving $77 billion in subsidies to corn, just corn,
right?
That's not capitalism. It's a kind of fascist capitalism, because the richest people have convinced people in government to give them money.
Yeah, people talk about state socialism, others talk about state capitalism, when the state's captured by the interests of the corporations. But to go back to that idea, I'm not sure we really have one economy in this country. I think we have a lot of them, a lot of different ones. And a lot of people are surviving by barter and exchange and all sorts of things that aren't the traditional American way, as we're told.
And I think that you're right about that. I think there are a lot of potentials, and I think there are examples out there of things that people can do. However, the way that people are educated or miseducated, the way people are organized, the choices that are offered to people don't reflect what you're saying.
Right.
If it did, that would be fine.
Well, let's go back to your latest novel for a minute, Rose Gold, which
Yes.
also came out this fall. You want to give us a little précis or a taster for people to go out and get it?
Easy Rawlins has made a switch in the last 2 books. The books before, it was my father's world, 1948 to about 1964. It's that family of my father's and my father himself living that life of hope that's with a background of real tragedy and suffering. And then with the beginning of the hippie movement, and the war in Vietnam, that's my world. And so, the last book, Little Green, was a lot about, the Sunset Strip and the hippies and communes and that kind of stuff. And this new one, a very wealthy woman might have been kidnapped by a black political activist, and they're charging, some kind of ransom. Or maybe that didn't happen. Maybe something else happened. And it's left up to Easy to figure out, well, what did happen and who is my client? And he doesn't even know who's hired him. There's a poor, kind of confused young black man who everybody has decided we're going to blame him for everything. And Easy figures this out, and in his head he says, well, this is my client then. I'm going to get him out of trouble. And so then it unfolds from there.
Obviously, the answer is, of course you did. But did you go back into this era of the Black liberation movement for a reason?
Well, I think it's an interesting movement, because it's at its heart, it makes so much sense, and it's so important. But there were criminal aspects to it. there were big political mistakes being made.
Is it perhaps not unrelated to the thinking you've been doing around the economy, in the sense that the Black Panthers, the Black Liberation Movement in lots of different forms, was one of our last liberation movements to connect rights and voting and civil representation with breakfast and dentistry and providing services? That what Naomi Klein on our show not long ago called the unfinished business of the liberation movements are these questions of economics.
Well, they're definitely questions of economics, and it's funny. It's hard to separate a notion of race from a notion of economics. It's also hard to bring them together.
In America, because of American history, or just in general?
Yeah, just in America, I'm saying. I think that in the whole history of colonization, it's difficult. Yeah. But it gets articulated in different ways in different countries. And so, some people, will say, well, is this class or is it race? And I'm saying, well, class is the left eye and race is the right eye. And if you really want to see what's in front of you, you need both to see it. And it's very, very difficult because, there's an answer which is outside of the dialogue. My answer is that there really is no such thing as white people. Mm-hmm. That white people don't exist, and they only invented themselves through colonization.
And kind of a mutable characteristic if you happen to be something like Irish.
Well, but
1 minute you're black, next minute you're not.
Right, exactly. But the deal is, it says we'll allow you to be white if you will follow these rules.
Right, it's
and
the
these
prize.
rules you get some benefits. You no longer get those benefits, but people still believe they get them.
That's right.
And so the one of the important things for me is, well, white people have to, because it's ridiculous to say white people. What does that mean? Like, to begin with, you're not white. Secondly, you don't have a common history. And there's all these things that are there. You don't look the same. Even and when you look at Europe, like even in Britain, there were 12 different races. I mean, the Picts, the Druids, the Celts, the Scots. I mean, it goes on and on. And for me, so dealing with the race thing, the first, if I could eradicate racism, which is easy to do just by white people stop thinking that they're white.
So in your utopia, we give up on that binary also.
Yeah. And then once you do that,
better off for it.
Well, then everything makes more sense. All the weight on top of you goes away, and but it's so difficult though, because a lot more white people today. I mean, the reason that white people listen to black music is not because of some natural evolution. It's because they're now suffering what black people have been suffering. So you listen to hip hop, you listen to blues, you listen to jazz, and all of a sudden there's a new story coming out of it. It's not an aesthetic, it's actually political content.
But at the same time, you have white supremacist movements building, promising whiteness as the last bastion of some kind of power and privilege for people, a lot of them working class people who've lost an awful lot else.
Yeah, a lot of people who've lost a lot. But, you see them do things like white power, and you go, right. hey,
Where'd you get that from?
I recognize that, there's a thing that, I'm not really sure. I mean, there are some people who are deeply committed to racism. Mm-hmm, They're deeply committed to it. But I'm not so sure that most people, I think most people, because, people have the ability to think. And if you can ask a question, so, well, is this right? And they go, wow. So I'm not that worried about who the enemy is, because I know that we all have the same problems. Mm-hmm.
Barack Obama probably sold a whole bunch of your books by saying you were his favorite detective writer.
No, wait a second.
Isn't that right?
It's Clinton. No,
it was
Barack
Clinton.
I have to straighten you out on that.
You're right. Well, you've been coming on the show long enough to remind me of Clinton era.
As far as I know, Barack Obama doesn't know I'm alive. Which is fine with me because I like him. I like the fact of having a black president in the United States, and that's perfectly fine with me.
Well, there you go. I just remember you as the president's favorite detective. So does Clinton still read the books? Do you think he'd read the Utopia?
Clinton still reads the mysteries. I doubt if he would read Utopia because he's. But it is that thing. I just want to say one of the things that my discovery in writing, because that's why I write these things, is that, the problem that capitalists have is that they think that wealth is unlimited.
Right.
And the thing that socialists have to teach them is that, no, there might be unlimited stuff, but wealth is based on labor. Wealth is based on what you do with that stuff. And so when you have that, what you have is, at any time, the wealth in the world has a limit. It's finite. And because of the machinations of capitalism, because of interests and loans, because some people make more money and can aggregate more money, that the idea of more wealth exists. But the more we imagine, the poorer people become. The more in debt most, like 80, 85, 90% of the world becomes.
And yet, you've taken me off into another tangent,
Well,
but
that's
we have
good.
to stop. But we are going to be dealing with more compromises as we run up against the limits of the finite planet.
Yeah.
So your utopia is right on the money, I reckon.
Well, thank you.
On the mark, at least. Walter Mosley, thanks for joining us on the Laura Flanders Show. Links to all of Walter's books and his monographs at our website.
I'm Alexis Pauline Gumbs, queer Black troublemaker, Black feminist love evangelist, and we are at the Allied Media Conference in Detroit, Michigan. Yay! My grandparents were revolutionaries. They were involved in the 1967 revolution in Anguilla. It says Anguilla on my shirt. Anguilla, represent. Anguilla is a really small island, and in 1967 they decided to secede from the British Empire, and for this tiny, tiny island to do that was a really big deal. And my grandfather was like the representative to the United Nations, and the British told him if he went back to Anguilla he would be shot on sight when they invaded, and all of this. And my grandmother designed the revolutionary Anguillan flag. That is something that has been a priceless thing to have in my life, like to understand my life in the context of a legacy that is transformative. And so if we all had that, I mean, what would we do? When I was about 14 is when I first started doing what I would call organizing, like youth organizing and youth facilitation, and seeing the need for that and wondering why the young people around me, like why were we so profoundly disenfranchised when we spent some of the most time in state institutions of anyone. Just getting that systemic analysis, like finally understanding that it's capitalism, it's on purpose, and it has to stop. Like having that revelation as a teenager means you have to like figure out what you're gonna do. So Mobile Homecoming, it's an experiential archive. So every time we are meeting or listening to or interviewing a different visionary, I write them a praise poem, and Julia creates a djembe rhythm with their name, and I actually dance for them. Mobile Homecoming is a love escapade. It's this amazing journey that I get to participate in with my partner as we amplify the brilliance that we know we've benefited from. Because we deserve to have a world where all of us, but our queer Black elders, can be honored with our best chosen words, with our whole bodies, with just like full celebration and sound. Because I have complete clarity that's the world we deserve to live in, to get to make that possible just a little bit at a time, like that it can actually be now, is huge. I mean, it's the most rewarding work that I've ever done. We have to be visionary, and our legacy is people who actually believe that the world could be different from what it was, and who actually, without knowing, believe that we would exist. The work that Barbara Smith and Beverly Smith were creating in 1979, which is before I was born, and what it means to see it, it's like they dreamed that those of us would come along who would need this and who would live in a moment where that could be actualized in a different way. We are in a paradigm where we are often expressing fear, acting out of fear, living as if fear is the content of our realities, but it's not. So to me, creating these spaces where people can share their stories and hear each other's stories and see each other and feel each other and hear each other, that's what's at stake, because that to me is what makes it most possible for us to actually live. Okay. I am significant. Makes you want to say I am magnificent. That's what I heard in my head while I was saying it.
Infectious disease specialists say Ebola can't spread through the air, but the political grandstanding about it sure can. And if history is any guide, it's the sickness in our political system that'll do us more harm than the epidemic. To recap, while close to 9,000 people in Africa have contracted Ebola, just 7 Americans have come down with it so far. By contrast, between 5 and 20% of US residents get the flu every year, and still most of us don't go in for our shots. There's no shot for Ebola, but it can be killed by bleach, and it can be contained, as it has been in Nigeria, according to the WHO, thanks to the calm, methodical action of smart local health workers. I mention all of this because, should you tune in to the US's midterm election madness, you'll hear Republicans and Democrats spreading all manner of panic. To start, they spent their time trading partisan attacks, accusing one another of not doing enough to keep Americans safe. Now, as time is getting tight, candidates of both parties are going after the president. Take those calls for a ban on travel from Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, something the administration is against and just about every sane health expert opposes. Calls for a ban have been coming from the lunatic fringe, but also from lunatics who aren't so fringe, like House Speaker John Boehner. But Democrats too are buying into the travel ban craze. It's a way to look good and tough and conveniently distant from the low approval ratings of the president. Candidates in tight races like Kay Hagan in North Carolina and Michelle Nunn in Georgia are both on board the travel ban bandwagon. And even the feminist favorite Texan, Wendy Davis, has come out in favor. What's public health expertise when polls like the one in the Washington Post report that 67% of Americans are in favor of a travel ban and more in Texas? With just days to go before elections, President Obama is hardly immune, of course. He kicked off this entire season calling for a war on Ebola. That's not reassuring. 40 years ago, Richard Nixon declared a war on drugs, and that brought us our longest, deadliest waste. $1 trillion spent, more than 45 million drug arrests. And where did it get us? Drugs are cheaper, purer, and ever easier to get. We don't know where the war on Ebola will take us, but we can look at the record. The war on drugs brought us prisons packed with nonviolent offenders. The war on immigration brought us border camps packed with kids. The war on terror, well, we know where that's taken us. It's not the Ebola pathogen that's the problem. It's our pathological political system. It's an incubator for alarmism and madness. You can write to me, Laura, at grittv.org, and you can watch my interview with author-activist Arundhati Roy at the Laura Flanders Show on grittv.org. Find out more from Telesur English.
We were taught that Gandhi's political awakening happened when he was thrown out of this whites-only compartment in South Africa.
On the train.
On the train. And in fact, Gandhi believed in racial segregation.
We wanted to be the most diverse media organization of its size. That was definitely and has been our biggest disappointment and our biggest failure.